let's do something unusual today. We will be stretching the language, the Dart language a little bit, and the framework, the Flutter framework as well. I will be testing some ideas today. I will be investigating some things I wanted to do with you. And this episode may be slightly more difficult than the previous one, but I hope it won't. I think you are ready. We already covered a lot of ground in this series. I think we can now explore some ideas and maybe get inspired by some other solutions out there. So today I will be taking my inspiration from React, and there is this thing called reacthooks. If you are a beginner, you probably haven't heard about this, but if you are already working in the field and maybe doing some front-end development, there is this kind of a shift happening right now where they are changing how you can do the software development, the front-end development in React. And there are some interesting parallels, some interesting similarities between what they do and what we do in our tiny series. Maybe there is a way to connect or to do something similar so we achieve the same abstractions. So we arrive at the point where we have a similar abstraction. So before we dive in, let's reiterate what we already achieved and what we are trying to build here. Our idea is to create two parallel worlds, so to speak. So the first world is the world of widgets. And ideally we want to have those widgets to be stateless. We don't want to have any state in our widgets and as a consequence in our widget tree. And there is a parallel world, the world of managers, that is responsible for managing the state. And now, instead of using something like a provider or any other solution that's, I think, popular right now in Flutter, which consists of trying to inject our state into the widget tree, what I want to achieve here is that I want to have those two parallel worlds, the worlds of widgets and the world of managers. And I want them to have the ability to cross or to pass the state in a horizontal manner. So we could say that the state would be somehow perpendicular to how those two worlds are built. So, you build your widget tree from top to bottom, you nest your widgets, and then you have managers, and maybe we will explore later on how we can nest them or maybe reuse some things. But they communicate somehow in a horizontal way, because widgets can directly reference managers they are interested in through our overseer. And this is somehow similar to what they do in reacthooks. And beside that, there is another interesting thing that if you want to use reacthooks, you have to, or you're encouraged to switch from classes to functions. And it matches very well with what we are trying to do in our widget tree, because the stateful widgets correspond somehow to the classes or components in React, and stateless widgets correspond to functions, as we discussed in one of the early episodes. So it matches somehow kind of nicely, we could say. And before we dive even more into that, I just want to say that I'm not really a fan of reacthooks. I don't think it's a good solution, but at the same time, I think the people at Facebook are doing a tremendous job because they are really innovating. And as always with innovation, if you are innovating, there is a lot of failures or things that just, the blocks that you are creating in order to achieve something. But to achieve something, you have to do this work in between. I think Facebook may be one of the companies that's really innovating in this field and pushing the envelope really hard, and I really appreciate that. But I think React hooks are just a step. I think there is a lot of interesting new things on the horizon, and if you're really interested in learning or being maybe slightly ahead in this subject, I encourage you to learn or to get familiar with the Clojure community, because in my opinion, Clojure community is where a lot of innovation in this field happens. Okay, having said that, let's jump into this episode. So we will start slowly, and this won't be ideal, and there will be a lot of code which won't be nice, but I think eventually we will be able to clean that up. So let's just quickly analyze this tiny bit of code here, the hook. So you're creating this function, this example function, and then you can ask someone to provide you some piece of state. In this case, it's a counter, and you provide an initializer for this thing which provides you that state, and it returns two things: the value, the actual value, the current value, and then the setter, something which sends the information that the counter should be increased or incremented, or something which should happen. So as you can see, this is already very familiar to what we are doing. So the count, the first element, corresponds to the stream, because whenever you are changing it, this whole component will be rendered. And then we have the set count, which corresponds to the sync, right? Because if we are changing something, we need to send, in our case, to managers. In this case, it's slightly magical because it's managed by React behind the scenes to inform that the state has changed. So let's try to replicate this model. Okay, so let me go back here. So ideally, I would like to do something like var. So let's focus first on the email field, okay? So our two fields. The first field we created. So this is this piece of code over here, and we have the stream, manager, email, and then we have the sync. So whenever something changes, we are sending this data, this value, to the manager, so it can validate that. So maybe we could do something like email, so the stream, and then set email, so the sync, and then maybe we could do something like a manager use email, similar to the convention that's used in React hooks to prefix all your hooks with the word use. But there are a few problems here, and it's mostly related to the Dart programming language, that we cannot do this syntax, so the structuring. We could do it more in a more object-oriented way. So what we could do here is that we have this manager as it is, because we are asking for the current value here. And let's refactor slightly, or maybe just let me leave that. I will just comment it out. And here, instead of doing it explicitly, which is not really clear when you're reading it or you're not familiar with the code, let's introduce another convention. So instead of exposing the sync, let's expose a method called setEmail, similar to what they do in React with hooks. And this will get a value, which is the current value being typed in this particular field. And then we can, behind the scenes, we can just do email sync add value, right? And we can use the shorthand, so it's nicer. So let's remove this sync from this field, and here let's just say set email, like so. So it's already nicer, but let's improve it even further. So So there is this problem here that we have this cognitive load, let's phrase it that way, in the sense that we have the text field and we have this strange thing, stream builder, and we need to wrap it, and then there's the builder. So maybe we could like combine it into one class, so we don't have to think about this. That because we already know that this text field is being recreated each time something changes in the stream over here, right? So let's compose this knowledge and let's abstract it, because it's not important to always. It's kind of like a boilerplate here. We already know what happens, and it's not really necessary to repeat that. So let's create a class, and I will call this class RxTextField, which is a field which knows how to handle streams and sinks. Okay, let's create that class, and this will be a stateless. Where are my stateless class? And let's call it RxTextField. So I'm calling it Rx because this text field should be reactive in the sense that it will accept a stream and it will be able to use the setter provided by the manager to update that stream and to notify or to rebuild the real text field beneath. Okay, so now let me just grab this piece of code here, and this is what should be returned. Right, like so. Some material. Okay, so we don't have the manager and we don't have the other things, but let's try to add them. So final, and the first thing is the stream, and let's use here the generics parameterized types, and let's do that this stream is of a general type. And let me call it, I will call it subscribe, okay? So I'm changing, and once again, I'm changing the convention. So this is kind of inspired by another framework I really like called Reframe, and it's comes from, of course, from Clojure. But I think it will be clear in a moment. And another thing would be the setter. So this will be a function, and I will call it dispatch. Okay, so it means that this function is used to dispatch a value to the manager, and this field subscribes to a stream. Okay, so that's the reason we call it like that. Okay, so now we have to create this subscribe and this dispatch, and we can now, instead of using, we can just use the subscribe here, and here we can use, so we have to use the T over here, and on change we can use the dispatch function provided to the field. So now there is this problem that we have this decoration which is specific. So this decoration should be set through text field, so through outside. And this is the part which is really ugly, or which is really not a part I don't really like here, because we'll be stretching the Dart a little bit, and I'm not aware if there are any other more elegant way of solving that, but I hope you excuse me for that, for this ugly code here. So we need to remove this part, this decoration, from here. And we need to allow the Rx text field to the entities that use Rx text field should be able to parameterize any field that's available in text field, right? So because this field will be somehow exposed in our case, we should be able through here be able to parameterize anything which is defined in text field. And that's a kind of like a problem here, because there is a lot of fields. So what we need to do now is we need to just copy those fields. So I'm not aware at this point if there is any other better way of doing that in Dart. This is somehow Dart specific. But we need to just take those fields and we need to add them on top of those two fields we just added, right? Like so. So here we need to change that. So just a reminder, we are using the curly braces, which means that these are the optional named parameters, right? And on top of that, we need to initialize some of them, because in the actual class that comes in Flutter, there are some checks, the assertions that checks those fields. So we need to, there is already a lot of repetition here, but that's not all, because now we need to pass all those fields to the text field. And because these are curly braces, so these are named optional parameters, you don't have to specify all of that when you are using this class. But even though this class needs to specify that, so we need to, unfortunately, we need to repeat that. Let me just do a quick cut and let me do it right away. Okay, so we added this. So as you can see, I'm just passing to the text field the same field I'm receiving from the constructor of our custom text field class. Okay, and we have still some problems because now we have to do another ugly thing. We have to add all those fields to our class as well. Okay, it's done. So as you can see, we define our two additional fields we need. And then we repeated all the fields we need to pass it through from Eric's text field to the real text field in Flutter, which is text field. And then we had to use that on the constructor as well, so that all the consumers, the entities that use Eric's text field, are able to set any of those fields that is present, that is available through text field. So we need to in this constructor, we need to repeat what we received. And since these fields are optional, it doesn't mean you have to specify them. It's that once this field is available, someone specifies this through Eric's text field, it will be passed to the text field as well. So it's kind of ugly, as you can see, because we repeated it here, here, and here. And as I said, I'm not very aware if there's another way, more elegant way of doing that in Dart. If you know, let me know. But now we can make this part, our actual application, slightly more elegant. So instead of doing this stream builder, we can just say now Rx text field, and let's import that. And we no longer need that. The stream will be defined here through subscribe. We don't need this. We don't need this. And on change, we change that to dispatch. The only missing thing is to deal with this error text message. So let's do that. So before, let me just, so this has to be like that. So we need to somehow make this work, whether there is an error or not. And what's nice here is that we can push this responsibility to our new class. So we don't have to really bother about this. So we don't have to specify it here. This will be implied when using this class. So we have to just add this here. So there is this slight problem here, which is that the decoration which is used is const, which means that it's immutable data. So if you are interested in that stuff, like immutable data structures, I will be covering that in this other series I'm doing, functional JavaScript. But anyway, this is a very nice idea. But we need to do something slightly more elaborate than just assigning the value. So we need to create our own decoration, and we need to use the decoration we received through parameters here. Where is it? This one. And we cannot just assign it. We have to copy with. And here we need to define the field we want to overwrite. So in our case, it's the error text, if I'm not mistaken. And as before, we will take it from the snapshot, which is here and comes from the stream builder. So this, we are hiding this part because we already know how it works, and we can just delegate it somewhere down in our application, so the entity, the widgets that use that don't have to really bother about that. So as you can see now, it looks kind of neat because we are just defining the text field. There's no the stream builder wrapping around. So cognitively, it's slightly more, it's simpler. And at the same time, we can pass all the fields that are defined for the regular text field through this Rx text field, because we did all those repetition. The only problem is that, you know, all the fields now in the documentation, there is dynamic. So I don't know how to make this work. So we lost the descriptions, because if we go here to the text field, the one that comes in Flutter, as you can see, I have the type and some description which comes from the docs, like max lines, for example. So it's int or max length. There's some description. If I'm doing this here, it's gone, it's missing. So kind of like a trade-off. And I will explain later why we did this trade-off, but let's see if it works. It works. And now we can just simply remove all this stuff. And we can use our new shiny reactive text field. Like that. And we can also use it here, even though we are not wrapping it, it doesn't really matter. So it's consistent. And the last thing would be to get rid of those sinks, so we can go back to our manager, and instead again of exposing the sink as we were doing up till now, we can just do set subject, and you know, again a value, and subject sync at value, and the same for the body. So let's set body. Okay. Here and here. So what's nice about this solution is that we are just taking two pieces of data from the manager for each field, which is the one that holds the actual value. And on top of that, it's not only the value, but it's a stream, so it changes. It means that whenever there's a change in the stream, the Rx text field will be rebuilt while being still a stateless class. So, and the second one is that we have this dispatcher. So a pair, a complement, and so the one is for reading values and the other one is for setting values. And we're now trying to establish this new convention that reading is through stream and setting is through this set email. So it's kind of very similar to how it works in reacthooks with reacthooks. So as I said, we can't really do this right now in Dart, the list, the structuring. Maybe in future they will add this. But this syntax is already nice, and we made our code slightly shorter here and slightly longer here. So another reason for doing this way is that I want to teach you how to create your own library, because eventually I would like to extract this part. So we will create in the next episode other fields, other reactive fields for example, for the radio buttons or other like plain buttons. in a similar way, and we will extract it to a library and we will publish it to the Flutter repository so that we already know how it works. In our code, we'll be using just that. So it's simpler, less cognitive load. It kind of looks like reacthooks, but we are not doing something magical here. We are not building something inside the framework. We are just using streams, plain old, simple streams, something we've been using all this long so far. And the last reason is that I really wanted that in our widgets, we only use stateless widgets. So you can see that we have now here this stateful widget, but we can now change it to a stateless widget. We can get rid of that, and it will work. So let's test it. Validation still works. Still works. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's all for today, and see you next time.